Coming up on New Day at Arirang, as South Korea's new COVID-19 cases and critical cases soar to record highs, the government considers an emergency response plan just weeks after easing social distancing restrictions. Inflation woes dominate the Federal Reserve's November policy meeting. Some policymakers say tapering should begin sooner. They say it will allow the Fed to raise rates sooner if they're forced to. Plus, when talks wrap up between South Korea and the US on a declaration to officially end the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, South Korea will reportedly propose the idea to North Korea. The plan is to have it ready for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. November 25th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next hour, we'll be looking at the biggest news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing South Korea and the world.
Now we start with the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. Things are looking dire in the country with the number of daily infections and critically ill patients hitting new heights. Authorities are getting ready intervene to tackle the crisis.
They certainly are. For more on this and other related updates to do with COVID-19, joining us in the studio is our reporter, Chae Min-jung. Good morning.
Good morning.
To you, Min-jung. So we saw this record daily tally on Wednesday of more than 4,000. First time we've ever seen that. Are we expecting an even bigger number today?
Luckily, no. The number for today is expected to stay below 4,000. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Wednesday, a little over 3,000 cases were confirmed. However, if you just look at the capital Seoul, the number of infections hit a new high. The capital confirmed 1,513 cases. The figures for Seoul have been spiking ever since the country began transitioning back to normal in early November. If you compare the numbers before and after the easing of restrictions over a 3-week period, the daily average more than doubled from the 600 range to nearly 1,400.
Now, Min-jung, with the ongoing surge, especially in the capital region, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum said that an emergency action plan could be adopted. What could be the likely measures?
Today, South Korea's Daily Recovery Committee for COVID-19 will be holding their 4th meeting. The committee, led by Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, will assess the current virus situation and decide on ways to strengthen antivirus measures. First, the government is planning to make vaccine passes valid for around 6 months after full vaccination due to concerns over waning immunity. Officials are also planning on expanding vaccine pass mandates for restaurants and cafes. And as of now, vaccine passes are not required for these locations. Another anticipated change is the expansion of vaccine passes for those younger than 18. With infections increasing among teenagers, places that are popular to students, such as singing rooms, may start to require vaccine passes for younger people as well.
Yeah, it must be said that compared to many other more advanced economies, the vaccination rate among those under 18 is much lower, relatively speaking. So there is this concern about the spread among younger people in South Korea, but also older people who are more susceptible to the serious conditions, perhaps even dying. What can older people do to protect themselves?
Well, authorities right now are emphasizing the need to get booster shots. Over the past 2 weeks, breakthrough infections accounted for 80% of the transmissions among those aged 60 and over. The Korean Medical Association on Wednesday said that booster shots are necessary as seniors are likely to get affected by waning vaccine immunity. Medical experts in Europe have also stressed that getting the extra dose will reduce infections and deaths. The European Center for Disease Prevention and Control on Wednesday said that COVID boosters should be considered for all adults, with priority given to those age 40 and older. It's also a major shift from its previous guidance in the fall, which said that there was no urgent need to administer more shots to the fully vaccinated.
But Min-jung, we heard a very tragic story yesterday that a country confirmed a COVID-19 infection for the first time in a miscarried fetus. Tell us more on this.
That's right. A midterm fetus was confirmed to be infected with COVID-19 for the very first time in the country. The 25-week pregnant woman contracted COVID-19 last week, and in just 4 days, she had a miscarriage. Authorities said the mother was unvaccinated, and the fetus tested positive afterwards. Whether the cause of death is COVID-related and how the fetus was infected is yet to be confirmed. According to a research conducted by the U.S. CDC, stillbirths among COVID-19 patients were almost double those among uninfected mothers. Given the risks, medical experts are recommending pregnant women get vaccinated as well.
All right, Min-jung, thank you so much for your report. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, the WHO is warning Europe may see the number of COVID-19 deaths spike between now and March next year.
After Austria imposed some of the strongest restrictions seen yet anywhere in the world, Germany and the Netherlands are about to announce their own antivirus measures. Kim Chang-ah with this report.
The World Health Organization has warned that Europe may see an additional 700,000 COVID-19 deaths by next March, in addition to the current figure of 1.5 million. It has also said it expects high or extreme stress in intensive care units in 49 out of its 53 member countries between now and March. The forecast is attributed to sluggish vaccine campaigns in some countries, the highly contagious Delta variant, and the colder weather, which is moving people indoors. The easing of social distancing measures is also a factor. While the whole bloc has, on average, a rate of 67% fully vaccinated, the number varies widely between countries. Many Eastern European nations are much lower, like Bulgaria, which only has 24% of its population fully vaccinated. Also, a concern is that COVID-19-related deaths doubled last week from 2 weeks ago. The WHO has said there was growing evidence that vaccine protection was waning. With that, EU ministers met Tuesday to discuss the need for booster shots.
The developments of the pandemic in the European Union and worldwide are still dramatic. One thing is clear, vaccinations save lives. But the vaccination quota in too many member states of the European Union, unfortunately also in Germany, is too low. So now is the time to finally talk about it.
The WHO also said that over 160,000 deaths could be prevented between now and March next year if universal mass coverage of 95% is achieved. However, the prospect of a winter under renewed restrictions has sparked unrest in several countries, including Belgium and the Netherlands, leading to violent protests. Meanwhile, despite the fear, the BBC cited several reasons for the UK being able to weather the virus this winter, including the amount of immunity the country has built up from a good vaccine rollout and natural immunity. Kim Chang-ah, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. As we just heard in that report there, numerous European countries are reporting hospitals at breaking point due to the massive resurgence of COVID-19 on the continent. Officials in those nations say the situation is so dire that they are reinforcing strict measures, including nationwide lockdowns and banning unvaccinated people from public places. Now, despite mass protests, Austria has gone into a nationwide lockdown, mandatory vaccinations as well to be enforced from February next year. The crisis, as we heard, is almost as acute in Germany. The country's health minister there warning that, quote, by the end of this winter, pretty much everyone in Germany will have been vaccinated, recovered or died.
And the World Health Organization has echoed that, saying several 100,000 people are projected to die from COVID-19 in Europe between now and spring next year. For more on this, we are joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Firstly, what are the variables causing this wave in Europe, and what do you make of the WHO's projection about the potential number of COVID-19 deaths there?
In Europe, they're still very vulnerable to COVID because they've done reasonably well in the last 2 years, the last 18 months, they haven't had so many infections in some parts of Europe particularly. And that means that they don't have that natural immunity, which is a good thing. But it means that right now they are vulnerable to having a lot of COVID spread. And not only Germany, Austria, Netherlands, but also, I would add, Greece and some countries in Eastern Europe. And so it's really a very worrying situation right now that they're vulnerable. And if all the public health measures are dropped and COVID's allowed to freely circulate, there could be a lot of infections this winter. So I hope that's not going to happen.
Now, I wanted to...
And in Austria, that it's not even that high. It's in the 60s to low 70s. And so restrictions do have to be put in place. I'm not sure that it's necessary to put them in place just for the unvaccinated, because I think there's many unvaccinated people who actually do have pretty reasonable immunity, because unfortunately they've been infected before, and this doesn't seem to take that into account. It seems to just class people as vaccinated or unvaccinated, whereas I would say it's more important if you're immune or not immune. And I think there's a lot of people who don't like this kind of policy. It feels like it's blaming the unvaccinated people, whereas there's more to the story than that. But at the same time, the government has to think of things to do to control transmission, because it can't be allowed to spread too easily. Otherwise, as you mentioned, there'll be a lot of hospitalizations this winter.
And Professor, we just mentioned that Germany's health minister said recently that, just to quote him again, by the end of this winter, pretty much everyone in Germany will have been vaccinated, recovered, or died. Should public officials choose their words more carefully, or is this kind of stark language warranted?
I think that's gone a bit beyond what we expect based on the data. What we know with infections like COVID is that over a period of time, particularly in a scenario where there's not much control measures, most of the population will have a chance to be infected. And that would be true in Korea, it would be true in Europe as well. So people in the community will have an exposure to the virus sooner or later. It may not be this winter, it may be in the coming years. Sooner or later, we will all have a chance to be infected. And at that point, it's much better for us if we've been vaccinated than if we haven't been vaccinated, because vaccine will reduce the chance we get infected. It'll reduce the chance we get severe disease if we are infected. But at the same time, we may all eventually have a chance to get infected. And I suppose that's what he's trying to express. But it sounds very extreme, that the words that he chose.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that the recovery rate from COVID-19 is very high anyway, especially among younger, healthier people, those who are seriously ill with other conditions, of course, different story. But regardless, it seems that other countries in Europe are going to follow Austria's lead, and perhaps that of Germany and the Netherlands, and go into these full lockdowns to try and stem the spread. But what does the data show? Do these strict nationwide lockdowns, are they actually effective?
Well, certainly they've worked a number of times in the past 2 years, but the problem is that they're very, very disruptive to society. They're very disruptive to the economy. So we've been hoping they won't be needed anymore. And what I think we need to find is a middle ground. So in the past 2 years, many parts of the world have had to do these very stringent social distancing measures, very stringent lockdowns. Now, with vaccines available, I think we're hoping that maybe we don't need anything. But actually, what will happen is something in between. We'll have the vaccines giving a lot of protection to the community, but we'll also need some form of social distancing, perhaps this winter, perhaps if the case numbers go up to a level that's threatening the public health system, the hospital system. But I hope that we won't see long-term widespread lockdowns, because they're really damaging to society and to the economy. And we hope that we wouldn't need them anymore.
Yeah, we certainly hope so too. Now, Professor Cao Ling, as always, we're grateful for your insights, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
South Korea and the U.S. are reportedly finalizing an end-of-war declaration document, but the allies remain at odds over the language in relation to denuclearization. Now, this is according to U.S. national security daily Politico, which cited sources familiar with the matter. It explained the document is almost done, with the format and content of the declaration nearly settled. Regarding the clause on denuclearization. Politico said it's not so much a sticking point, but something the two countries are working on to ensure North Korea doesn't dismiss the document. The U.S. Commerce Department is adding 27 foreign entities to its blacklist of actors that engage in activities that go against America's national security and foreign policy interests. This includes those who have contributed to the military advancement of China and Russia, as well as those who played a role in the development of Pakistan's missile and nuclear programs. Kim Hyo-san has this report.
Washington has blacklisted 27 foreign entities for export control over national security concerns. According to the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, the list includes 12 entities from China, as well as Pakistan, Singapore, and Japan. It also includes one entity based in Russia. In a statement Wednesday, the Bureau said the entities have been determined by the U.S. government to be acting contrary to the national security or foreign policy interests of the U.S. It explained that 8 Chinese entities were blacklisted for their participation in the military modernization of the People's Liberation Army, seeking to acquire U.S. origin items for military application. It will also restrict exports to Chinese producers of electronics that support the modernization efforts of China's military. It also explained that 3 affiliates of China's Korea Technology Limited, an entity that has been blacklisted in 2009, were included for their role in selling technology from the U.S. and other Western countries to Iran's military and space programs. They're also known to have cooperated with North Korean front companies. The Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology was added for its production of military products for a military end user. The other entities were designated for their participation in Pakistan's ballistic missile program and on safeguarded nuclear activities. While export, re-export, and in-country transfer to these entities will be banned, the entities will also be subject to license denials. The Department of Commerce says these measures will prevent the diversion of American technologies to China and Russia's militaries, highlighting that they will be effectively used to protect U.S. national security. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
Following the U.S. decision to coordinate a collective release of strategic oil reserves with 5 world powers to cool rising fuel prices, China says it will release state reserves according to its own needs. Beijing's Foreign Ministry confirmed this on Wednesday, noting that relevant information will be published without delay. The spokesperson didn't elaborate on whether China was taking part in the U.S. coordinated release, but said Beijing will cooperate to ensure stability in the oil market. The White House said Tuesday that the U.S. will release millions of barrels of its strategic reserves to curb soaring prices, adding other major consumers like China, India, Japan, the UK, and South Korea were joining the move.
The Federal Reserve is expressing fresh concerns over inflation, saying it's ready to raise interest rates if prices keep rising. This information coming from the minutes of the November session of the FOMC that was released on Wednesday. The minutes also suggest the Fed could dial back on all economic assistance it's been providing during the pandemic. They also indicate a lively discussion on inflation, with a number of members stressing a willingness to act sooner than previously anticipated on rates and tapering if conditions worsen. Shoppers in South Korea have noticed the price of even the most basic groceries have been rising fast in recent months. The country endured its highest inflation in a decade last month. But why is it happening now, and what items have risen in price the most? Jang Tae-hyun went to see for himself and files his report.
The rise in oil and raw material costs has led to a rise in production prices, and that is also affecting the consumer prices. I'm at Myeongil Traditional Market in Seoul to find out whether people here can also sense the rise in food prices.
Prices of water parsley, seasoned pigweed, pepper leaves, pepper, eggplant, and cucumber have all gone up.
For meat as well, one vendor said there's not much revenue left, considering the amount they pay for beef and pork.
Well, livestock farmers will be having a hard time producing because of the rise in the cost of feed. I can understand that. The price of Hanu, or Korean beef, went up by 20% on year. So people buy less because it's pricey.
And another concern is that now is the time for South Korean families to gather together and do kimjang, making lots of kimchi to store ahead of the long winter. But the cost of making kimchi has soared compared to the previous year.
There are not many cabbages, so it's more expensive. So there are many people who can't do kimjang. Others do it with radish. But I still did kimjang with 36 cabbages. 3 cabbages were 10,000 won last year, but this year they were 18,000. It was 8,000 won more expensive while their condition was worse. But I still had to do it for my children.
The wholesale price of cabbage stands at 3,213 won, which is an increase of more than 48% on year. Experts say the price of cabbage went up because of the weather, as well as an outbreak of a bacterial soft rot. Even garlic is 8,425 won per kilogram, and that's a roughly 30% increase on year. Amid surging global oil prices, all of South Korea's cities and provinces saw a rise in consumer prices in the third quarter of this year. Data released by Statistics Korea on Monday shows that the consumer price index in Q3 edged up 2.6% from a year ago. That is the biggest increase in 9.5 years. Inflation was the worst in Jeollabuk-do province and Jeju Island at 3.2%. But Seoul's rises were smaller as they were offset by the reduced cost of utilities. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
Exports to the United States now account for 15% of South Korea's total outbound shipments. It's the first time the proportion has been that high since 2004. While China is still the top destination, the current trend suggests the gap could narrow in the years to come. Kim Sang-min with the details.
South Korea's exports to the U.S. are increasing at a rapid pace, but exports to China have seen sluggish growth. A recent report by the Federation of Korean Industries shows South Korea's exports to the U.S. have grown to take up 15% of the country's total for the first time in 17 years. Although that is still smaller than China, which accounts for around a quarter of all exports, the current pace of growth of shipments to the U.S. is expected to narrow the gap. In fact, the faster rate of growth has been apparent over the past 5 years. From 2017 to 2021, exports to the U.S. grew almost 18% from the previous 5 years, coming to around $386 billion. Although China is still Seoul's biggest market, exports to China only grew 7% during the same period. The report says the bumper growth of exports to the U.S. can be attributed to the Biden administration's carbon slashing measures. The ambitious carbon net zero goal led to increased U.S. demand for electric cars, which in turn boosted Korea's chip and battery exports by 50% over the past 2 years. Experts say that this recent trend can be seen as a positive sign, as Korea can reduce its high reliance on a single country, China.
Because export dependency on China has been too high, if China suffers an economic downturn, the effect will be passed on to us too. So the fact that reliance on China is decreasing is positive.
He added that Korea should still work to diversify both its export and import channels to reduce risks coming from China. Kim Sang-min, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to people from around the world on issues making headlines. And today we venture out of the Arirang studio to bring you this special edition from the heart of Seoul, where our guest has been on a 4-day state visit. Now, President of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado Quesada, is one of the world's youngest heads of state, a former musician, author, and now an honorary citizen of Seoul. And we sit down with him today to ask him some of the biggest questions that all societies around the world are facing amid their efforts to recover from this pandemic. Well, buenos dias, Mr. President. It's wonderful to have you here on our show. And, well, as a Seoul citizen, I must ask, how has our city been treating you these last few days?
Wonderful. I'm so impressed of, even though Costa Rica and Korea are somehow far away, I'm impressed of how easily we can relate, and it's been a warm welcome, and I mean it's been amazing.
And well, you've met with our President, President Moon Jae-in, of course, and well, your visit really, it proves just how closer our countries are becoming in our bilateral ties, which is hitting 6 decades next year in 2022. And well, in fact, you and President Moon upgraded our bilateral ties to an action-oriented, comprehensive partnership. Could you define this for us?
Well, as I mentioned, even though Costa Rica and Korea might seem far away because of the distance, when you think about the values that unite us, those values are really strong and embedded in our societies. We're talking about democracy, we're talking about human rights, we're talking about sustainability, and for both of our peoples, the longing of peace. So those values bring us together in the multilateral diplomatic agenda, but both in cooperation and even on trade issues. So that is why we have decided to take to a next level the partnership between our countries because of those common values. And this means working together addressing climate change, working together in innovation, for example, in hydrogen, electric mobility, digital, tourism, film industry. There are many fields that we are working together, research in medical trials. I mean, it's outstanding, and we are just grasping the tip of the iceberg of what we can do together.
And it looks like you've actually been leading by example, really. It seems that you've been communicating with President Moon throughout the pandemic. And while Costa Rica and South Korea, they were lauded as, they were lauded for initially their initial response to this pandemic, for being able to really keep those infection numbers and fatalities down. Well, how are you and President Moon cooperating to tackle this health crisis?
Well, at the beginning, we have to say that Korea was one of the first countries that provided help to Costa Rica. They sent us many technical assistance and also equipment to address this. And we are very thankful to Korea's president, to its government, and to its people. Also, by sharing information, it is true that through the cultural behavior of both our countries, we have managed to resist and contain the virus. And now, similar that here in Korea and Costa Rica, we are starting a process to gradually open up more the economy. It's also interesting that in the case of Costa Rica, we never went into a lockdown. We could not make a lockdown because we needed people to go to work and we needed the economy to keep moving to preserve jobs. And what I've seen in Korea is also a great performance in that sense. So that also strengthens the concept that we can do things similarly and therefore that we need to work together.
I see. And well, on top of the public health crisis, of course, climate change, of course, has been another major agenda, another challenge that all countries face. And it was highlighted very recently, earlier this month at the COP26 summit, where you and other world leaders from over 100 countries, you pledged to actively tackle deforestation, and you also pledged your net zero goals. And well, you've been pushing for these goals for quite a long time, even before the COP26 summit came about. And well, you've also produced very ambitious net zero policies. How do you hope to see Costa Rica really leading by example, by positive example, and working with South Korea in tackling this very urgent crisis that the world faces?
Well, climate change is something we need to address because an ethical issue. If we do not change the current course of the climate crisis, there won't be a planet for us, for our children, or our grandchildren. So it's an ethical matter because it's the only generation in human history that has faced this kind of problem. It's basically an existential problem. But also because it's an opportunity. Many people think that changing the way we produce or changing the way we generate energy is going to threat the economy. And we believe it's the other way around. For example, in Costa Rica, our conservation of forests did not harm the economy. On the other hand, it increased our tourism based on an ecotourism system. We have 5% of the world biodiversity, even though our territory is not as big. In the case of transportation in Costa Rica, transportation is still our largest carbon footprint. But given that our electricity is clean and renewable, we can transform all our public transportation from fossil fuels to electric and hydrogen transportation, and to eliminate our carbon footprint. That is why the alliance with Korea is key, because we have the clean energy and Korea has the technology to do that. And that's one example we can show the world it is possible, Korea and Costa Rica together.
Exactly, and your more than $1.5 billion project on electric trains now, that's getting a lot of South Korean companies excited, I believe. And well, what other opportunities do you see for green partnership between Costa Rica and South Korea?
Well, as I mentioned, the transformation of transportation is a big one, because we have the clean energy and the necessity, and Korea has the technology. So that there is an area that we can work with vehicle manufacturers, with trains, with the public transportation organizations, but also in terms of improving the way we produce. We have had here in Korea an alliance with GGGI, with the president of GGGI, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and we're going to establish an office in Costa Rica. And now we're working in two projects: one to fix carbon through the roots in production, put it in on the soil back, another to improve the other way we use refrigerators to reduce emissions and consumption. So those are very practicals. And in the new alliance and association with Korea, it's not only bilateral cooperation. The plan is, given that Costa Rica is now also an OECD country, the plan is for Costa Rica and Korea to become a place that we can spread triangular cooperation in the rest of Central America and in the Caribbean. Also to have the support of Korea go beyond. And that's a very exciting news as well, of this new kind of association between our countries.
It is indeed, and these innovative collaborations are what this world strongly needs. And well, you're a development expert, and you actually enacted some structural reforms that really paved the way for Costa Rica's admission into the OECD. And it looks like the world could do with a bit of your advice, as the need for socio-economic reforms, it's been made all the more apparent throughout this crisis. We've seen wealth, the concentration of wealth burgeoning at the top among tech elites and multimillionaires, whereas average income for the average Joe, it's remained pretty much stagnant. How should our societies really tackle this wealth and income inequality?
Well, that's one of the key issues that the pandemic has revealed. The gap of inequality has widened. Many things we need to address. One has to do with education in terms of the technological means that everybody has access to equipment and access to connectivity in order to have high quality education, regardless of their background. And every country, even Costa Rica, we need to fight to have every kid in public or private school in every part of the country with that kind of connectivity. Also, one of the things that we are experiencing in Latin America and emerging economies is that our economies are having debt problems. Why? Because our economies decreased during the year of the pandemic. The expenditure increased due to the vaccines, due to all the expenses of taking care of the pandemic. And we had already had debts, and now our debt levels are increasing. So to address this, there's the opportunity to have a fiscal system more equitable. But this is not only for kind of a prosecution perspective. This is also to have societies that have more cohesion, and they can become successful, and governments that use those taxes in the best way. That is why for us was critical to become part of the OECD, because we want to be more efficient and more citizen-driven in terms of our results as a government.
Well, you mentioned household debt, and along with household debt, South Korea and Costa Rica also face other socio-economic challenges, particularly when it comes to productivity. Our countries are facing a rapidly aging population. Many of our workers are overworked and tired, according to the OECD. And well, as we face these challenges of declining productivity, how should our countries then boost it to look into the future?
Well, I'm not particularly a expert in that specific field, but even though I used to be Minister of Labor. But one thing I know, and we should learn from other OECD countries, both Costa Rica and Korea, is that we do not only need to work hard, but we need to work smart. That means concentrating the efforts in the results. The time we use or devote for tasks is not necessarily, and how hard we work is not necessarily the standard. The standard should be results. We should be more result-driven.
Now, for a very important question, as a former musician, how do you rate the recent success of K-pop around the world?
Well, I have to say that K-pop is being I mean, it's amazing how teenagers and young people in Costa Rica and elsewhere are so drawn into K-pop. I have to say that given that I like classic rock, I think it's not particularly for my generation, but it's so impressive how that that has done this cultural leapfrogging, going from being something from Korea and now being something practically universal, which is quite outstanding, and I celebrate that. And I think it's happening in other fields. For example, in the film industry, I put always the example, my parents, they love watching Korean films and series on Netflix, and they keep telling me, oh, I love this Korean series, and I found that outstanding. My parents in Costa Rica, in their living room, half a world away from here, watching stories that happen here in Korea, and it's remarkable.
And we definitely want to see more cultural collaboration. Next year, we're marking 60 years of diplomatic ties. Now, what do you hope to see from our two countries in the next 6 decades?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Well, my ambition as a Costa Rican and now as a president is to have the kind of human development that Koreans have had in the past decades, that kind of growth and that kind of sense of opportunity. But in a Costa Rican way. I think we need to follow that example, that through hard work, through discipline, through innovation, good change is possible. For me, Korea is one of the great examples, and I was in Costa Rica when I have spoken to the National Assembly. I keep saying that we need to look to good examples, and to picture that, I say we need to become the South Korea of the Americas, to picture that. So for the next 60 years, I do believe we need to complement ourselves, because we have things that are complementary. We have to keep those values strong, that legacy. We have to establish a partnership in which we want not only to request things from Korea, but also to give back. Those kinds of things are the ones that I foresee happening. And who knows, we might have a joint Costa Rican-Korean film, a mixed K-pop band of Costa Ricans and Koreans.
I'm thinking kimchi empanadas. What do you think?
Well, it can be kimchi and gallo pinto, which is a national dish, and we can have tastings of coffee and of soju. Yes, and I think those kinds of things could put our peoples together. I also have found that and I have not yet understand why, but Costa Ricans and Koreans tend to be, they relate very easily. I mean, we are very straightforward, We are very easygoing in terms of relating to each other. We are respectful. So there's also an advantage. We don't create a huge distance. It's for us easy to relate. So that's another advantage.
And well, finally, you wear a lot of hats. You wear multiple hats. You were formerly a musician, a writer, a scholar, minister, a president, and now, of course, an honorary citizen of Seoul. If I may, what's next for you?
Well, I think for the next months after I end my presidency, will be resting. I need to have a pause and to relax a bit because for the past 9 years, I've been in political campaign, then been a minister, then again in a political campaign, now being a president. So I want to take a pause, to spend more time with my kid, with 8-year-old Gabriel, and then decide what the next step is going to be. But for the time being, will be a perhaps well-deserved pause.
Well deserved indeed, and well, it was wonderful having you on our show, Mr. President, and well, we have to let you go now as you have a plane to catch. And well, thank you again, President Carlos Alvarado Quesada, President of Costa Rica. It was a delight having you, an honor, and have a safe trip back to Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
South Korea and Russia celebrated 3 decades of diplomatic ties in 2020. In a bid to further cement relations through culture, a project dubbed Russian Seasons is taking place in Seoul. Kim Bo-kyung was there and follows this report.
The Russian Seasons, a cultural project that bridges Russia with other countries, is in South Korea this year. That follows the 30th anniversary of establishing diplomatic ties last year and the designation of 2020 and 2021 as special years of cultural exchange.
Cultural exchange further promotes exchanges of human resources. We've seen that happen after Russian Seasons in Italy and Germany. It's important to learn more about each other's culture, and I hope we can have more interaction after the project is over.
One of the most significant cultural events held recently was the installation of iconic Russian writer Leo Tolstoy's bust at the Literature House Seoul. Among the participants was Vladimir Tolstoy, the great-great-grandson of Leo Tolstoy and a cultural advisor to President Putin. He stressed how significant it was to have the bust in South Korea, as well as having a South Korean company support Russian literature.
Russia's most prestigious literary awards are the Tolstoy Awards. They give prizes to writers who wrote the best literary work in Russia and the best work translated into Russian. For 20 years, Samsung Electronics has been helping us continue these awards. I am glad to see the awards, and an event like this is being held in recognition of Leo Tolstoy.
Renowned conductor Valery Gergiev, who is known to sometimes use a toothpick as a baton when leading an orchestra, also visited Seoul to hold a concert on Wednesday with the Mariinsky Stradivarius Ensemble. It is the first time for the ensemble to perform in South Korea. During the press conference, the conductor underlined that such cultural interactions are a way of fermenting diplomatic ties.
Cultural exchanges transcend political issues. Successfully continuing cultural exchanges plays a great part in maintaining a favorable relationship between countries.
As Russia and South Korea start their 4th decade of diplomatic ties, cultural events are expected to play a key role in boosting that relationship. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, what steps should Seoul take to grow as a global city? On Wednesday, Seoul City wanted an answer to that question, so it hosted the Global City Competitiveness Forum with renowned economist Tyler Cohen and the Vice Chairman of Forbes, Christopher Forbes, as well as other experts. The forum is part of an initiative to help Seoul become one of the world's top 5 cities by the year 2030. If you want to watch the event again, you can do so on Seoul City's official YouTube channel.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now.
5.
Vietnam and Japan agreed on Wednesday to strengthen their security cooperation and boost their pandemic-hit economies. The agreement comes as Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh held talks with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida in Tokyo, where the two leaders pledged to work together for a free and open Indo-Pacific region amid rising concerns over China's territorial assertiveness.
First of all, we agreed to continue top-level talks to strengthen political trust, substantial cooperation on security, national defense, diplomacy, and to cooperate on Taiwan. I hope we can consider each other important, long-term partners and take the relationship between our countries to another level.
Pundits say Japan's efforts to strengthen ties with Vietnam highlights its willingness to maintain influence in Southeast Asia, as next year Cambodia will assume the chairmanship of ASEAN, raising concerns for Japan that China's influence on the group will increase, given Beijing's close ties with Cambodia. In response, Kishida agreed to export more defense equipment, such as naval vessels, to Vietnam. Pham is the first foreign leader to visit Japan since Kishida took office, while also marking the Japanese leader's first in-person meeting with another head of state other than at international conferences. The Cyberspace Administration of China on Tuesday announced fresh regulations that strictly limit what celebrities, their agencies, and even their fans can do on social media, as Beijing continues its campaign to discipline pop culture and fan clubs. The latest measures include a limit on the number of social media accounts celebrities can have, while also banning them from showing off their luxury lifestyle and restricting posts that show their work and activities. The CAC also stipulates that entertainment companies should be limited to just one account on each social media platform, while fan club accounts need to be authorized by the agency. It also banned the act of whitewashing a celebrity if he or she has violated the law or engaged in what is considered unethical behavior. Watchers here in South Korea fear the crackdown could further hamper South Korea's entertainment business in China. In September, the Chinese government cracked down on K-pop fandom, a measure they say was necessary for a healthy cyberspace environment. NASA on Tuesday launched a spacecraft that must ultimately crash to succeed in order to test the world's first planetary defense system designed to deflect an asteroid from a potential doomsday collision with Earth. The DART spacecraft, short for Double Asteroid Redirection Test, will fly under the guidance of NASA's flight directors until the final hours of its trip, before controls will be handed over to an autonomous onboard navigation system. The spacecraft will then crash into an asteroid, altering its trajectory with sheer kinetic force to nudge the space boulder just enough off course to keep Earth out of harm's way. DART's target is an asteroid moonlet the size of a football stadium in a binary asteroid system called Didymos, the Greek word for twin. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Western parts of the country, including the Seoul metropolitan area, saw some brief showers earlier today. Most of the rain has now tapered off, and conditions are forecast to look mild with warm sunshine during the day. For southern parts of the country, temperatures will return to the seasonal average. However, for central regions, conditions will feel colder than the actual readings because of the frigid wind, so please dress warmly. The air is circulating at a fairly fast rate, bringing decent air quality across the nation. Air quality will stand in the normal to good category nationwide. Also, dry weather advisories have been issued across the coastal areas of Gangwon-do province. Gusty offshore winds are also in the forecast, raising the risk of wildfires. For those in the area, please be extra careful with anything that can start a fire. Mild sunshine will dominate for the daytime. Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 8 degrees. Gyeongju 11, Gwangju will make it to 14 degrees Celsius. The capital region will see sub-zero figures again for tomorrow and Saturday. Next Monday, nationwide showers are in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now, but we'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Ho-kyan.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be here on Friday at the same time, and I'll be back minus Mo-kyan at 10 a.m. Korea time with our next newscast. Until then, goodbye.